Heavy hauling can be hard work, not just the part where you have to somehow get a huge hunk of machinery on a transport vehicle, but also the logistics and legal know-how you need to understand. The larger the load, the bigger the headache. In this video, we discuss common pitfalls of heavy hauling. No worries, we're going to give you some great tips on how to do heavy hauling the right way. Heavy hauling pitfalls. There are many pitfalls you might encounter with heavy hauling. Let's dive into some of the more common pitfalls. Not accurately measuring your heavy haul. The first decision you need to make is what kind of transport vehicle is needed for the heavy haul. It's not like you can just whip out the tape measure and postal scale for a huge piece of construction equipment. Also, some machinery and materials are oddly shaped. The planning for the heavy haul begins with accurately measuring your cargo. You'll need to determine the weight as well as the length, width, and height. Be sure to include whatever you use to secure the load, such as tie-downs and chains. Not inspecting the load. Another common pitfall is not double or triple checking the load. You must carefully inspect the load before the heavy hauler fires up the transport vehicle. Not inspecting the transport vehicle. You also need to inspect the transport vehicle. All that weight can wear down a truck and a trailer. A carefully tied down load will hit the bricks if the transport vehicle's tires fail. Not getting proper permits. Permits are not just revenue enhancers for state and local government agencies. It's how you let local authorities know you're going to be driving around in a big transport vehicle with a giant load that could pose a danger to their citizens. Not knowing and following their rules and regulations is a huge pitfall. Instead of reaching your destination, you may find yourself stopping off at the courthouse to pay a big fine. Driving too fast. Driving too fast is an all too common pitfall. You're in a transport vehicle, not a race car. Drive like you're taking grandma to church. And in this case, grandma weighs many tons and is precariously perched on a trailer bed. Careless driving is more than a pitfall. Lives are at stake. The National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, or NHTSA, reports that in 2019 there were 5,005 fatal crashes involving large trucks. That's those with a gross weight of 10,000 pounds or more. 3,016, almost 60% of those, involve tractor trailers. Not knowing the state's laws. We know you've hauled heavy stuff in California, Wisconsin, and Idaho, but now you're in North Carolina, and maybe the heavy hauling laws are the same, but maybe not. A huge heavy haul pitfall is assuming that what flies in one state is totally cool in another. Here's an example. In Idaho, an oversized permit is good for 5 days, and you can travel any day 30 minutes before sunrise and 30 minutes after sunset. In North Carolina, the permit's good for 10 days, but you cannot travel on any given Sunday. Not traveling the route in advance. Another heavy haul pitfall is not driving the route you've mapped out in advance. How the route looks on a map may be very different in real life. Or maybe you did remember to drive the route a couple of weeks ago. Check it out again a day or two before the haul date if at all possible. You want to identify any impediments to the transport vehicle, like low overpasses, in advance. You definitely do not want your transport driver discovering those problems up close and personal. Not mapping an alternate route. Traveling the route in advance is a great way to reduce risk, but things happen, like all the time. Another heavy haul pitfall is not planning out an alternative route for your transport driver. Not staying in touch with the driver. Your transport driver can run into trouble on the road. They should be able to easily reach you or someone on the team. You want to be the one who makes any needed executive decisions. Not staying in touch with your transport driver is a pitfall that's easily avoided. Before they hit the road, double check that they have the team's contact info readily available. Not checking in. A huge heavy haul pitfall is not checking in and inspecting the load throughout the transport. It's not enough to make sure the load's tied down properly before you start moving. The moving of the vehicle can shift the load. Not being flashy. We're not talking about putting on a studded leather jacket and snakeskin boots. You might look cool, but not flashy enough for other drivers to know you're there. This heavy haul pitfall involves thinking a large transport vehicle with a crane on top is obvious enough. But to a regular commuter drinking coffee and talking on their phone and changing lanes, it isn't. Flashers, flags, banners, and an escort vehicle may be needed or even required by law to get their attention. Not being prepared for takeoff. We know you spend a lot of time and energy getting your heavy haul to the job site. You're tired. Well, that's too bad, because a heavy haul pitfall is not being prepared to take the load off the transport vehicle. There's more to unloading than undoing the tie downs and taking off the cargo, but we'll talk about this more in our list of heavy haul tips. Not wearing proper PPE. Worn out or cheap boots, just don't cut it on a heavy haul job. Wear the hard hat and the vest with the shiny orange stuff all over it. A solid pair of gloves will keep your hand model career alive, and safety glasses will keep your peepers pretty.
Now, before we continue, be sure to crush the like button and subscribe to E&C to receive more heavy equipment guides. We do appreciate your support.
10 tips for heavy hauling. So we've told you all the things that commonly go wrong with a heavy haul. It's a pretty long list of pitfalls. Now we're going to give you 10 solid heavy haul tips so you won't be the next NHTSA statistic. Tip 1. Measure twice or 3 times. You should consider having multiple people independently measure the load to make sure the numbers are accurate. Tip number 2. Ensure the load is properly secured. Take a close look at tie downs, chains, and anything else that's securing the load. Chain and hook sizes need to match to ensure they'll stay tight. Tip 3. Use the tie down points specified by the equipment's manufacturer. These are typically marked, but you can also refer to the manual. Tip 4. Create a checklist for inspections and actually use it. This way you'll know you haven't missed anything. Tip number 5. Be sure your PPE is in good condition. Then actually wear it. Tip number 6. Be flashy. Use every tool available to make sure those distracted drivers know you're there, whether the law requires it or not. Tip number 7. Drive carefully. Slow down. We understand the pressure of getting there on time, but think about how mad everybody's gonna be if you don't show up at all. Tip number 8. Follow industry safety standards for check-ins and inspections. First inspection at the 50-mile mark. Inspections every 150 miles or after 3 hours of driving, and every time you change drivers. Tip number 9. Get the required permits and understand the laws for the states you're driving in. Driving through multiple states? Adhere to the strictest laws. Tip number 10. Have a detailed unloading plan. This includes having a prep team on site before the load arrives, allowing only workers involved in unloading to remain in the area, making sure each person on the team knows their role and responsibilities before the transport vehicle arrives, and doing a final inspection of the load, transport vehicle, tools, ramps, and anchor points after unloading and before the team heads off to the local pub. Bonus tip. Hire a professional heavy hauler if you have any doubt about your ability to get this load from point A to point B safely. Our heavy hauler tips breakdown. Here's a quick overview. Inspect everything before you load, before you move, while you're on the road, and before you unload. Know the local laws, get needed permits, and make sure everyone on the road knows you're coming. Drive like grandma's life depends on it, because it does. And when in doubt, contract it out. Let the pros do the heavy hauling for you. Conclusion. Heavy hauling is rife with pitfalls, but there are ways to avoid them. One is to follow our list of heavy hauling tips. The other is to hire professional heavy haulers. This takes the load off your shoulders and hands it off to knowledgeable, experienced heavy haulers who know what to do. They'll make sure your load gets to the job site safely.
We'd like to thank our sponsor for this video. Check out D. Berardini Heavy Haul, based out of Orlando, Florida. You can give them a call at 321-299-5993. Stay tuned for more heavy equipment guides. Also, you can view our complete list of guides at eandcmag.com. That's eandcmag.com.